A Japanese bomber pilot marks his chart. February 27, 1944. Open water south of Okinawa. He reports a direct hit submarine destroyed. For 75 years, that report sat in an archive. Untranslated, unverified. Then in 2019, cameras dropped into 1,400 feet of black water and found her. But what they saw didn't match what anyone expected, because USS Grayback, one of the deadliest American submarines of World War II, had secrets the Navy never recorded. And the wreck proves it. Grayback was found 100 miles off from where the U.S. Navy said she went down. The Lost 52 Project Expedition used autonomous underwater vehicles to sweep the East China Sea floor coordinates pulled from a translated Japanese war log, not American records. When the ROV descended in June 2019, sonar revealed a 300-foot shadow split into sections. The conning tower was intact, the deck gun faced forward, and the forward section had been torn away from the main hull. First images showed damage consistent with an aerial attack, something that struck from above with enough force to break her apart. The Discovery team, led by undersea explorer Tim Taylor, had been searching for months based on U.S. Navy coordinates that placed Grayback's last known position over 100 nautical miles to the northwest. Those coordinates came from American patrol records the sub's assigned hunting zone. Standard procedure was to estimate a submarine's last position based on her final radio transmission and her projected patrol route. The Navy did exactly that in March 1944, when Grayback failed to return to Pearl Harbor. But those estimates were just that, estimates. And in the vastness of the Pacific, being off by 100 miles meant the difference between finding a wreck and searching empty ocean floor forever. What changed everything was a single researcher halfway around the world. Yutaka Iwasaki, a Japanese translator and amateur military historian, was combing through digitized Imperial Japanese Navy aviation logs when he found an entry that had never been cross-referenced with American loss reports. It described a Nakajima B-5N torpedo bomber crew attacking a surface submarine on February 27, 1944, at dusk, in open water south of Okinawa. The coordinates were precise. Latitude and longitude recorded by the navigator, and they were nowhere near where the U.S. Navy had been looking. When Iwasaki shared his findings with the Lost 52 project in early 2019, Taylor's team was skeptical. They'd been searching the Navy's coordinates for weeks with cutting-edge sonar, and had found nothing. But they had nothing to lose. They shifted their search grid 100 miles south, reprogrammed the AUVs, and sent them back down. They found her in less than a week. The first sonar pass showed a massive object far too large and geometrically precise to be a natural formation. The second pass revealed the unmistakable silhouette of a Tambor-class submarine. When the ROV cameras finally descended and the lights pierced the darkness at 1,400 feet, the team saw the conning tower first still upright, still proud, with the faint outline of a painted identification number barely visible through decades of marine growth. Then the camera panned forward, and they saw the forward section had separated from the hull. Not collapsed, not crushed, separated. The submarine had broken apart, and the forward section was lying in the silt some distance away, as if something had struck with tremendous force. For decades, Grayback had been listed as overdue, presumed lost, with no confirmed location. The U.S. assumed she'd gone down near her patrol zone farther north, possibly the victim of a mine, a depth charge attack, or catastrophic mechanical failure. Those were the usual suspects when a submarine simply vanished. But that Japanese pilot's log, only translated in 2018, described dropping a bomb on a surface submarine in this exact area. It took 75 years for anyone to connect the dots. The wreck's location validated enemy records over Allied ones, flipping the investigative script. It also raised an uncomfortable question: how many other lost submarines were being searched for in the wrong place because the U.S. relied solely on its own incomplete records? The initial survey footage went public in November 2019. The U.S. Navy confirmed the wreck's identity by matching hull features, the conning tower configuration, and the visible remains of the deck gun to Grayback's known specifications. Families of the crew members were notified before the announcement, Many were flown to a private screening where they watched ROV footage of the conning tower, still bearing faint traces of the sub's identification number. The reaction was immediate relief, grief, anger. Relief that their loved ones had finally been found. For 75 years, the families had no grave to visit, no place to lay flowers, no physical proof their fathers and grandfathers had ever existed beyond a name on a memorial wall. Now they had coordinates, a location, a resting place. Grief over confirmation of what they'd always known. Hope is a strange thing. Even when the odds are zero, some part of the human mind holds on to the possibility that maybe, somehow, the story ended differently. The wreck erased that possibility, and anger that it took a private expedition and a foreign nation's archives to locate a U.S. Navy submarine. Why hadn't the Navy translated those Japanese records decades ago? Why had the search been confined to the wrong coordinates for 75 years? And why did it take a crowd-funded civilian team to finish the job? Naval historians called it a landmark discovery, not just because it solved a 75-year mystery, but because it exposed a fundamental flaw in how the Navy documented wartime losses. The assumption had always been that American records were more reliable than enemy records. But Grayback proved the opposite. The Japanese navigator who recorded those coordinates had no reason to lie. He wasn't filing a combat report for a medal. He was logging a tactical event for his squadron's records. And he was right. The discovery also triggered a wave of new research into other lost submarines. If Grayback had been found using Japanese records, what about the others? The Navy's official list included 52 submarines lost during World War II. Only a handful had confirmed wreck sites. The rest were statistical ghosts. Presumed lost, approximate locations, no physical evidence. The Lost 52 project's success with Grayback opened the door to re-examining all of them. But if the Japanese knew where she sank and recorded the exact coordinates, why did a single bomb cause such catastrophic damage? Grayback's 10th patrol was supposed to be routine. Hunt convoys returned to Pearl Harbor. She departed Midway Atoll on January 28, 1944, with her crew and orders to disrupt Japanese supply lines near the Ryukyu Islands. Her combat record was flawless. 14 enemy ships sunk, over 70,000 tons of Japanese shipping sent to the bottom. By mid-February, she'd already torpedoed 2 freighters off Formosa. Radio contact ceased on February 26th. The next day, the Japanese bomber logged the attack at dusk, when American submarines routinely surfaced to recharge batteries. Survivor accounts don't exist. No distress signal was ever received. The Navy waited weeks, monitoring radio frequencies, hoping for a transmission. Nothing came. On March 30th, 1944, Grayback was officially declared lost with all hands. Her commander, Lieutenant Commander John Anderson Moore, was on his second patrol aboard Grayback. War Patrol reports from her previous 9 missions showed a methodical, aggressive tactician. Moore favored surface attacks at night, using the deck gun to conserve torpedoes for high-value targets. Torpedoes were scarce, expensive, and as submariners bitterly joked, about as reliable as a coin flip. The deck gun was simple, brutal, effective. Moore's crew trusted him. Several enlisted men had turned down transfers to stay aboard Grayback. Submarine service was voluntary. No one was forced into this silent service. The men who served on subs did so because they believed in their boat and their captain. And Moore had earned that belief. In 9 patrols, he'd brought them home every time. On February 26th, Grayback transmitted her final radio message to Pacific Fleet Headquarters, a status update reporting successful attacks, standard communication, routine language, no indication of mechanical trouble, no mention of enemy contact, no request for support, just a status update, the kind sent dozens of times per patrol, then silence. What the Navy didn't know at the time was that Japanese naval air patrols had intensified in the East China Sea. The American island hopping campaign was pushing closer to the Japanese home islands, and the Imperial Navy had responded by flooding the region with bomber squadrons flying round-the-clock anti-submarine sweeps. Every surface submarine was a target. Every twilight silhouette was hunted. Grayback had entered a kill zone. The patrol area Moore was assigned, the waters between Formosa and Okinawa, was one of the most dangerous in the Pacific. It sat astride major Japanese shipping lanes, which made it rich with targets. But it was also heavily patrolled, shallow in places, and close enough to Japanese air bases that bombers could loiter for hours. American submarine doctrine in 1944 called for submerged running during daylight, surfacing only after full darkness, for battery recharging in transit. A Tambor-class boat like Grayback could remain submerged for about 48 hours if the crew minimized activity. But the batteries drained quickly. Every night, without fail, the boat had to surface and run the diesel engines to recharge. That was the window of maximum vulnerability. On the surface, a submarine was slow, loud, and visible. Submerged, she was silent and invisible. But submerged, she was also running on borrowed time. The wreck's visible condition suggests what happened next. The damage is consistent with a direct aerial attack, the kind of strike that would have come without warning. The bomb hit while the crew was likely on the surface. Submarines in 1944 were not air-conditioned. After a full day submerged, the air inside was thick, hot, and heavy with carbon dioxide. The moment the boat surfaced, hatches were cracked open to vent stale air and pull in fresh. It was standard procedure. It was also a fatal vulnerability. The attack happened at dusk. Visibility was fading, but not gone. The sky would have been a gradient of orange and deep blue, and the ocean surface would have been dark, but not black. A trained air crew could still spot a surface submarine, especially if they knew where to look. Grayback would have been running on the surface, possibly tracking another convoy. The bomber crew likely spotted her silhouette against the twilight horizon, a dark shape cutting a white wake through calm water. No time to dive. Crash dives took 30 to 45 seconds under ideal conditions, and that was if the crew was already at diving stations with hatches sealed. If men were topside manning the deck gun or the lookout platforms, it took longer. By the time the lookout spotted the aircraft, the bomb was already falling. No chance to seal compartments. The blast would have been catastrophic. Those topside would have been killed instantly. Those below would have had seconds at most. Long enough to hear the explosion. Long enough to feel the boat lurch. Long enough to know. The submarine sank rapidly. Water would have poured through the damage and any open hatches in a roaring torrent, flooding compartments faster than watertight doors could be sealed. The lights would have gone out almost immediately as seawater hit electrical systems. Men in the aft sections might have tried to seal themselves in, hoping to buy time, hoping for a miracle. But at 1,400 feet, there are no miracles. The pressure hull designed to withstand operational depths up to about 250 feet would have been subjected to crushing pressure as the wreck descended. No warning, no chance. And the Japanese bomber crew flew home, logged their kill, and never thought about it again. The wreck separation shows damage consistent with a devastating strike. OV imaging reveals the submarine broken into sections, with the primary damage area showing evidence of a direct hit. The wreck's condition is consistent with what naval forensic experts would expect from a bomb penetrating the pressure hull and detonating inside. When a bomb strikes a submarine's pressure hull, the results are catastrophic. The hull is designed to keep water out under immense external pressure, but it's relatively thin, only about an inch of high tensile steel. A bomb penetrating from above would punch through, detonate inside, and create a massive internal explosion. The blast wave from an internal detonation has nowhere to go. In open air, explosions dissipate rapidly. Inside a sealed steel cylinder, the pressure spike is channeled along the hull, seeking any weakness, any opening, any structural vulnerability. Bulkheads can fail. Welds can split. Compartments can rupture. But the wreck also raises questions that go beyond simple blast mechanics. The Mark 14 torpedo is one of the most infamous weapons failures in U.S. military history. For the first 2 years of the Pacific War, American submarines fired thousands of torpedoes that either ran too deep, failed to detonate on contact, or worst of all, exploded prematurely. sometimes inside the tube during launch. The problem was the Mark VI magnetic exploder, a theoretically brilliant device designed to detonate beneath a target's keel, breaking the ship's back with a single explosion. In practice, it was a disaster. The exploder was hypersensitive to vibration, temperature changes, magnetic field variations, and even the torpedo's own running depth. Submariners reported torpedoes detonating when they hit the wake of their own submarine. Others exploded when jostled during depth charge attacks. By 1944, the Navy had largely fixed the Mark XIV. The magnetic exploder had been deactivated on most boats, and the contact exploder had been redesigned. But even the improved Mark XIV was still prone to issues under extreme conditions. If Grayback was carrying reload torpedoes in her forward room, and submarines on patrol typically carried spares, those warheads were live and sitting in racks just feet from the outer hull. Each Mark XIV carried a 643-pound warhead packed with Torpax, an explosive compound 50% more powerful than TNT. A bomb penetrating the hull and detonating could potentially trigger sympathetic detonations in stored torpedoes. The shockwave, pressure spike, and heat could set off the sensitive exploders. That could explain the catastrophic damage. Not just a bomb, but a bomb plus internal secondary explosions amplifying the destruction. Japanese records mention a direct hit. They never saw what happened below the surface. To them, it was a clean kill bomb hit. Submarine sank. Mission accomplished. The aircrew probably reported back to base, had a meal, and flew another patrol the next day. But the wreck tells a more complex story. It tells a story of how a single attack could trigger cascading failures that tore a submarine apart. American submarines survived bomb hits before. The pressure hulls were tough, and unless the bomb penetrated a critical space like the control room or engine room, boats could sometimes limp back to port. But if the bomb triggered the submarine's own weapons, survival became impossible. Grayback's wreck is now a war grave, protected under federal law. Under the Sunken Military Craft Act, the site is protected from unauthorized disturbance. The wreck belongs to the U.S. Navy, and while the Act allows for potential Navy-authorized research or recovery in specific cases, Grayback remains undisturbed. These are war graves. The men aboard didn't sign up to have their final resting place disturbed. The Navy treats sunken warships with reverence, and the families have largely supported that decision. Yet the discovery raised questions that may never be fully answered. Why was the submarine on the surface at dusk in heavily patrolled waters? Doctrine called for submerged running during daylight. Surfacing only after full darkness in safer waters. Was Moore tracking a high-value target that justified the risk? Was the battery situation more critical than normal, forcing an early surface? Or did the crew simply not know how close the Japanese air patrols had gotten? The wreck can't answer those questions. Only the crew knew, and they took that knowledge with them. Families of the lost crew members received some measure of closure when the discovery was announced. For 75 years, they had no grave to visit, no coordinates to mark on a map. Now they do. Their names are carved into the walls of the missing at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu. For 3/4 of a century, that wall was the only memorial they had. Now they have a location, a resting place. Environmentally, the wreck is deteriorating. Corrosion will continue to erase identifying features. The salt water at 1,400 feet is cold enough to slow biological decay. But galvanic corrosion, the electrochemical process that breaks down metal in seawater, is relentless. In another 50 years, Grayback will be harder to identify. Eventually, she'll blend into the seafloor, another debris field among thousands scattered across the Pacific. Historically, the wreck stands as evidence of the brutal realities of submarine warfare. The Silent Service sank over 1,000 Japanese ships and played a decisive role in winning the Pacific War. But 52 American submarines never came home. Each one carried dozens of men. Each one has a story. And most of them are still lost. Grayback's discovery proved that even 75 years later, these stories can still be found. But finding them requires looking beyond American records, beyond assumptions, beyond the official version of events. The Japanese navigator who recorded those coordinates in 1944 gave Grayback's crew something the U.S. Navy couldn't: a marked grave. He had no way of knowing that 75 years later, his logbook entry would lead a team of researchers to a wreck the Americans had been searching for in the wrong place. He was just doing his job, recording what he saw, logging the coordinates, and unknowingly, he gave families an answer. The ROV footage shows the conning tower still standing, the deck gun aimed at an enemy that no longer exists. It's frozen in time, a snapshot of a battle that ended 80 years ago. Deep inside, in flooded compartments no camera has reached, there are spaces untouched since 1944. Compartments where pressure equalized slowly enough that bulkheads held. Spaces that might still hold letters, photographs, personal effects. The families want to know what's there. The Navy says the wreck is a grave, and graves are meant to stay closed. But the questions remain. And somewhere in those dark, flooded spaces, the final moments of USS Grayback are preserved exactly as they happened. A story written in steel and silence, waiting in the deep.